All right, thank you so much. Let's see if we can get this clicker working now. Yes. Okay, so this talk is the why of CSS in JS. I'm going to be talking about trade-offs. The talk title is concerning CSS in JS, and that is a pun. CSS in JS is concerning, and this talk is concerning CSS in JS. So we'll cover some of those. And then toward the end, I'm going to be talking about some of the problems that we have with CSS and JS. I'm also going to start a timer that I forgot to start, so I don't go over because I don't want to waste your time. So there we go. I'm not going to attempt to get you to use CSS and JS. I'm more interested in just getting you to open your mind to the idea. And I really want to avoid bad-mouthing the CSS community. That's one thing that I think us of the CSS and JS community have done kind of poorly, is just talking about how terrible CSS is and how terrible a person you must be if you like it, which of course is not the case. And so if you are of the CSS and JS inclination, please be nice and recognize that your use case isn't everyone else's. So, cool. So let's get into this. This is a component. It is a toggle button. So you click on it, and it shows a toggled state. You hover over it, and it shows that your whatever has that state that is keeping track of it by itself. And this is the component that we're going to be building. So with React, we build this component kind of like this. We have some state that we manage. We have our JavaScript and our HTML inside of there. I am one of those who kind of threw up in their mouth when I first saw HTML and JavaScript. Like, what is this? And then you fall in love with it like 5 minutes. And it's awesome. So there are, React showed us how great an idea it is to kind of group these things together. And there's the really commonly quoted separation of technologies, not separation of concerns. So it's okay to group these two things together because their concern is the component. And so we're not separating concerns by separating the HTML and JavaScript. So that's been really successful for, I expect, everybody in this room and many, many more people in the world. So I'm going to refactor this a little bit to make our transition to CSS and JS a little bit smoother. So here we'll just take a look at this right here. I'm not really good with Keynote, so that's why it doesn't like morph into the new code. But we just have a button and we have some class names here. Now we're going to change that into a primary button, CSS buttons, and we're going to pass an active prop. And everything else essentially about it is going to be the same. It's going to apply the right class name so that we can show to the user that this thing is active. And so this is what it's going to be. And there's a lot of song and dance to make this work, but we're going to accept a class name, and we can have, you can add more class names. So we'll default that to empty string if you don't. And then we'll stick that in. And I apologize for Slides.js. They used to be much better at showing JSX, like syntax highlighting, but now all of a sudden they're like really, really bad. So I'm thinking about moving to Spectacle just because Slides you for hitting JSX. So we're going to apply the proper class names based off of our props, and then we'll forward any other props like ID or data. And then one of the cool things about React is that it's so composable. So we have our app button that has like the base stuff, and we have our primary button that can compose the app button into itself. It's so awesome. I love React so much. But this leaves one question here: is where are the styles? Where's the CSS? We have some class names, and many of us know CSS. We know when I apply a class name, if those styles aren't in the style sheet of the document, then those styles will be applied, right? So this is where the CSS is. I just saved you hours of work looking for the CSS in your giant project. And there are a couple of questions that I have about the CSS. Anytime I go into a project that where I'm new, when I'm going into like a new area of the code base, I have a couple of questions that I ask about the CSS. The first is, what are the conventions that we're supposed to be following in this code base? Are we doing BEM? Are we doing OOSC, whatever, all these different conventions that we have in our CSS? So I had to figure out what those conventions are. And then I'm wondering, okay, if I make a change to this, who is going to be impacted? Where in the entire code base universe am I going to be making it? And is it okay for me to delete these styles? Yeah, that is like, actually, Michael Jackson, just a week ago, tweeted a video of Ryan Florence saying, my number one question, my only question about CSS is, can I delete these styles? And I agree with him. That is a big question. It's really hard to solve with CSS. And then related to all of those is, can I change? What would happen if I change? So I'm going to take a step back and talk about something called a pit of success. How many people have heard this phrase before? Okay. So pit of success, there's a blog post that I just found today from Coding Horror. But he was actually referencing a blog post back in 2003. So this is not a new subject. But it's basically like the quote here, and I'll just read it to you. A well-designed system makes it to do the right thing. Annoying, but not impossible. So with Angular, I was an Angular folk person like a year and a half ago. I loved it. It was awesome. But the pit of success with Angular, especially with regards to performance, was not very big. It was really easy to do the wrong thing with Angular. And that was one of the motivating factors for me moving to React. It was hard to make React not fast. Yeah, and I'm sure many of you are like, well, I could. But if like the natural thing to do is just to be fast. It's fast by default. So that's kind of the idea of pit of success. And I believe that using convention is just us compensating for not having a wide enough success. So I drew these today in my hotel. See, we have these conventions. Cannot read, but it's the sign that says success. It's pointing us to the pit, success. And some people are looking at the sign like, I'm not sure I understand this convention. Other people are like, where is the convention? I don't know where the pit of success is. And other people know the convention really well, and they're just like, sweet, success! And they love it, and it's awesome. And we all want to get to the success. But wouldn't it be cool if the pit of success were more like this, where you can't not fall into the pit? But it's a good one. Look at how happy this person is, and they're so happy, rolling down this pit of success. And so, again, I feel like conventions are great. And don't get me wrong, I think conventions are an important part of our code bases. You know, you don't want to have like random file names and whatever. But having conventions are, as cool as conventions are, it would be even cooler if the default was what you want to enforce by the convention. So I'm going to just give you kind of an idea of a problem that I was facing at work and how CSS-in-JS has helped us with this. So I work on the peer-to-peer payments team at PayPal, and recently became in charge of our funnel page. I built this. I didn't design it. I don't know how to design things, but I can make you a UI. This is our funnel page. We have many different things that you can do with the peer-to-peer payment system that we have. And one thing about this page is it's like naturally responsive, right? We need to have it to be responsive. But it's also highly experimental. It has a lot of different variations to it. And this is because this is the first page that people are going to see when they come into our flow, when they decide what they're going to do. And so it's really important that we get this right so people know all the services, but it's like not too much information that they just leave. So it is very highly experimental, from the content to the design to the layout to like everything. And before, our CSS was like this. We use less. I'm not going to say any more about that. And what we would do is, like, you want to try and share as much as possible, try to be dry, and so you don't have to fix bugs in two places, stuff like that. And so for each one of our experiments, we would add a class to the body or wherever, like the root of our the funnel page, and then we would kind of compose these styles together. And actually, I think I can scroll here. So yeah, lots of this, etc. Where we're trying to share these styles. And the question that I had when I came in to start maintaining this was, if I'm going to be adding a new variation to this funnel page, do I modify some styles in this file, or do I create my own file and have it be like totally separate? And it was a really hard question to answer, because if I decided to modify or like reuse some styles, I wasn't sure what impact that would have on all of the other pages. And it was not an easy task to go and verify. So that was a real pain. Yeah, what impact will my change? So let's go back to our toggle component here that we visited at the beginning. And we'll look at the different states that we have and what the styles look like, and what it would look like if it was not. So we have this toggle me, that's the default state. If we didn't have our CSS applied for some reason, then this is what it would look like, which is fine. People can still use that button. If there's focus, we still get that, default the browser. And then for our toggle state, it actually looks exactly the same. The browser doesn't have support for a toggled state for a button. There is no toggle button. And honestly, please don't add a toggle button. We don't need like a bajillion. But that is a problem from an accessibility standpoint, from a usability standpoint. And speaking of accessibility, you should do much more than just change the color of something when like to indicate state. That's a talk for another time, but accessibility is important. So yeah, without our a CSS applied, then our component totally does not work. It doesn't deliver the value that it's supposed to be delivering. So that brings into question, what is a component made of then? We know it's the HTML, like we have that JSX weirdness, and we know the JavaScript to respond to when the user does something, interacts with our HTML, with our button. But it also is the CSS as well. The component is just not complete without this. Yeah, those three things make up the component. So let's look at what it would be like to put our CSS, co-locate our CSS with our component. Because we've determined that putting HTML, JavaScript together, it's great because they're the same concern. And now we can see that CSS is also part of that concern. So here we have our CSS. This is just kind of reminder stuff. This is our component that is utilizing that CSS. We're going to take this and turn it into CSS-in-JS with Glamour, which I'm going to say is actually faster. But yeah, no, they are all fast. It's great. So this is Glamour, and we're now in JavaScript land. You import the CSS thing from Glamour, and instead of the normal CSS that you know and love, you write it as objects. So the property being or the key being the property, the CSS property, and the value being the value of that property. And there are a lot of really interesting things you can do as well, like hover states and pseudo selectors and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the basic idea. Is we just basically moved our CSS into our JavaScript file, and now what's cool, like already right from that, one nice thing that we get is when I'm coming into this app button component and I'm saying, hey, there's something wrong with this app button component. It's not firing an on-click, or it's not applying the styles that I expect it to. I don't have to go anywhere to find the styles. It's right there. It's right in front of my face, and it's awesome. So a couple other things to note about this solution and about CSS in general is for quite a while after CSS-in-JS became popular, people started just applying it to the style prop of your components. And so it would be like inline styles. Pretty much none of the mainstream CSS-in-JS solutions do that anymore. There are many problems with that, not the least of which is like you can't do media queries or hover states with that. And so you have to do some JavaScript fanciness to make that work. and you lose all of the benefits of well, lots of the benefits of CSS with that. So what Glamor is doing for us, and what many of the solutions do for us, is it gives us back a class name, and then we can apply that to any element we want. This works without React. It works, just regular HTML. You just apply that class name to an element that you want it applied to, and what it looks like is something like CSS dash like crazy hash thing. And yeah, and it's crazy fast too. It's really impressively fast. So we didn't actually change a whole lot from what we had before. We just had our styles over here to what we have now. The component's basically the same, except it's not using some global class name. It's now using this class name that we're creating with Glamor. And we get a lot of big wins. So now my question is, okay, can I remove these styles? Can I delete these? Yeah, it's very clear that I can delete these styles. The only thing that's using them are these things. The next question that people often have with CSS and JS is, okay, so how do I share these styles across things? Like with CSS, it's just like use the class name. It's so easy. And I'm not surprised that that's a common question, because when you're doing CSS and JS, you have to change your mindset entirely. But what you need to remember is when you're inside JavaScript, you're inside JavaScript, and so you can do anything. It's amazing. I love it. And one of the cool things you can do is use modules if you're using a bundler or something like that, which most of us are. And so you just create a module with your styles, and then suddenly you can share those. And what's really cool about that is now your dependencies become explicit. So instead of having this class name, you have to grep across your entire code base to find, okay, who's using this, or whatever the case may be. You just look at the imports. You look at the exports. It's statically deterministic, which is super cool. You can do some really impressive and cool things with that in that way. So yeah, a lot of wins just from this simple move it into a JavaScript file. So actually, let's go back here just a sec. So here's that component, our app button and our primary button. And like I said, there's a little bit of song and dance to this. With every single component that you want to have styled, you want to be able to like merge styles together, apply class names. And here we're not actually getting rid of the cascade. Somebody could pass in a class name into here, and we put those two together, and who knows what's going to apply, right? And so to kind of solve that problem, I built this thing called Glamorous. And yeah, I'm pretty proud of this. So so what this does is basically it kind of does that song and dance for you. And I can't talk about this without talking about styled components. This was very heavily inspired by styled components. How many people in the room have heard of styled components? Okay, so for those who have not heard of styled components, it is a pretty popular CSS and JS solution that allows you to write your CSS in JS almost like it's actually CSS. So you put the CSS in a string, and then that string is parsed, and then the CSS is injected into a style sheet. And so what's kind of cool about that, what you kind of get out of that is it's very comfortable. You're writing regular CSS. And then what you get out of that is a component. And anytime you use that component, it kind of carries its styles with it. And those styles can be applied, and you can compose things together really well. And that's basically like the biggest difference between styled components and Glamorous is that with styled components, you use strings that are parsed and like template literals, and you write basic regular CSS just in your JavaScript file. And with Glamorous, you use objects. And yeah, that's pretty much the basic difference. But here with Glamorous, we say glamorous.button. So I want to create a button component, something that renders a button. And the styles I want to apply to that button are these. And then I'm going to create this object that has some styles in it. Call those highlight styles. And then I'm going to say, hey, Glamorous, I want you to compose this app button. And I want you to do all the same things the app button does. But instead of the background color that this has or whatever, I want you to add these styles on top of that. And then if you get a prop that is active, if the prop active is true, then I want you to use the highlight styles. Otherwise, like, don't worry about it. Just null. And so you have this idea of like these static styles that are just always going to be that way, and these dynamic styles. Yeah, and that separation is actually quite nice when you're composing things together, and maintaining this is being able to see, okay, what parts of this actually react to my user interaction. So it's really not that far a cry from what we had before. We just had some regular CSS, and it was in a separate file, and we mostly just changed a little bit of the syntax and stuff, and now we have some CSS that works essentially the same, but it's scoped, it's isolated. We don't have to worry about the cascade or specificity or CSS linter. We can just use regular ESLint. All of that stuff we don't really have to worry about because we're creating our components with Glamorous here. One other really killer feature, and this is actually one of my coworkers, when I showed this to him, he was like, yeah, I pretty much hate Glamorous so much. It kind of hurt my heart because I was so excited about this. But then I showed him this, and this blew his mind, and he was really excited about this. How many people here are familiar with JS Snapshot? Okay, raise the roof for JS Snapshot testing. So awesome. And couple that with Glamour and Glamorous, and you've got yourself something really cool. So snapshot testing allows you to basically serialize an object, or in our case a component, and save that to a file. I don't have time to actually give you a proper demonstration. Well, how many people want a proper demonstration of this? Yeah, most of you. I think I do have time. So I'm gonna a quick proper demonstration. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna put the mic down and yell. Can you all hear me? Okay, I can't actually do that, but thank you. What service? Like, holy, wow, yeah. Okay.
Wait, it's not so. Okay, you do your stuff.
Okay. Okay. Here we go. So what I've got here is just running in the background. And it's running in its watch mode. And if you haven't used Jest before, I strongly recommend that you use it because it's amazing. And one of the cool things that it can do is this snapshotting thing. So I've got this app button thing that I was showing you in my slides. And I'm going to go ahead and change the font weight to 300. And with CSS, my question would be, what happens? Like, what did I break in my application? So I'm going to hit save here, and my tests rerun, and my tests break. But what tests are breaking? You would think it's the buttons test, right? No, it's not actually. It's the toggle test, the toggle component that is using this button. And what it's telling me is that the CSS that's applied when I render this component changes. It changed from 400 to 300. And it's asking me, is that okay? And so now you can have your all of the components in your application snapshotted, and anytime you make any sort of change to your CSS, you're going to see exactly the impacts. This is hilarious. Hi. You're going to see. Oh, actually, I think I'm done with the demonstration. That was great. Thank you. I didn't have to type as much as I thought I did, but I'm glad that I had to do that anyway. Thank you. Yeah, so anytime you make a change to some CSS stuff, you can see everywhere in your application that made an impact. And if you're like, oh, I didn't realize that this component was using this in that way, let me go visually verify that looks okay. And then if it does, then with regular JS snapshot testing, you just hit the U key, updates your snapshots. And we can talk about snapshots at another time. Come chat with me. I love snapshots. Raise the roof on. In fact, kcd.im/egghead-jest. And that will give you 5 or 6 free videos that I've made about Jest. And one of those gives a great overview to Jest snapshot testing. So if you want to look at that. So anyway, yeah, this Jest Glamour React thing, pretty legit, and it's really a really nice way to verify that the changes that you're making are the changes that you want to have happen. The only way to really accomplish this well with CSS is by taking an actual screenshot of your rendered component, which requires you fire up a browser in headless mode or something and take screenshots, and then like crazy amount of finickiness, and it's really not easy to set up. So having this is a really great middle ground. So now after remember I showed you all of those import or those like class names and import statements and our less. Now our code base looks more like this, just composing components together. And again, I'm so sorry for the syntax highlighting that. Slides, I'm pretty sure they use Angular. I'm just going to say it. Just kidding.
Java.
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly not Kotlin, that's for sure. Okay, yeah, so you're just kind of glossing over some details, but we have all of these components that we just kind of composed together for each of these links that we have. And I'll just show you really quick the anchor component just to give you kind of an idea of what's possible with CSS and JS. One of the really cool things about CSS and JS is these we can have these shared modules like our styles here. We're going to pull in our media queries, and then I'm just going to alias those to desktop and mobile because who likes typing out this really long media query? I don't. And also I have this onAttention variable name that says, hey, these things. And so I can actually give meaningful names to selectors and to things. So when somebody comes by and sees this string, they actually know what it's for, like what its purpose is. Having variable names and having a real actual programming language to use them in is really quite nice. One thing that I'm calling out here is you can't get away from like browser weirdness, even with CSS and JS. One thing that's nice is that most CSS and JS libraries will do vendor prefixing for you automatically, which is cool. But there's still some weird quirks that you have to use, even with CSS and JS. One thing that I think is kind of important, I should like bump this up a little bit, but yeah, thank you slides for not bumping that up for me. But one thing that I think is important is to be able to have these all of the power of CSS in your solution. And so like one of the key features of CSS and JS is having your CSS scoped to a specific component and not like reaching into something else and like changing that. That's one of the nice benefits. Sometimes it's really nice to be able to do that. And this is an escape hatch that Glamour allows you to have. And so we have this kind of familiar syntax from like less or stylus or Sass. And then also just being able to merge styles together. You don't need mix-ins. Why do you need mix-ins in JavaScript? You have JavaScript. It's a real programming language, and so we're using object spread here to apply some additional styles, which is super cool. And then here we're using our media query, and we say, hey, when it's desktop, let's make it look like this. So yeah, being able to compose things together. So with my last couple minutes, I want to talk about some of the concerns. Why is CSS and JS so concerning? How many people here are like pretty stoked about CSS and JS and like, woo, CSS and wow, I did such a bad job. Well, I'm going to make those of you who didn't raise your hand even more sure that you don't want to use CSS and JS. But this is actually, like, my goal here is to inspire some innovation. I want to see all of you participating in the CSS and JS movement because this, in my eyes, for application development, this CSS and JS is clearly superior in many ways. But there are problems with it. I want to see those problems solved, and I think that you all can do it because you are all awesome developers. So one problem with CSS and JS is familiarity. A couple of the solutions for the familiarity problem that do exist right now are styled components I talked about earlier. It's much more familiar to be able to just type your regular CSS. CSS to JS or CSS to CSS and JS is this basically this hack job that I made to make it so you can copy your CSS into a text box and it'll change it into like objects, which is kind of handy when you're migrating something over. And then there's this JSS CLI. JSS is another CSS and JS library. How many S's can I say? And it has this CLI to convert a CSS file into a JSS file, which is pretty neat. So my question to you is, how would you solve this problem? How would you solve the familiarity problem? And I don't have time to like take answers to that question, but that is like the question that we need answered, and that I hope you think about. How do we solve the familiarity problem with CSS and JS? Maybe we don't, and people just like learn CSS and JS, and we move on with it. So another complaint that people have is the workflow in IDE. We have like really great CSS support in our IDEs. And so right now there is linting available for your JavaScript, right? We have ESLint and it's amazing, but we don't have like any sort of auto completion or any linting for like whether or not I'm misspelling none for the display property, like NOEN typo or something like that. And so like I started an ESLint plugin, and you can finish it, and it's linked right there. And actually, if you really are interested, I have great learning materials for writing ESLint plugins. So come chat with me later. I'm serious. I have a lot of things that I'm doing, and I would love it for somebody else to do this. So most of the existing solutions do have some sort of TypeScript or Flow support. Glamorous has TypeScript support. If you're into Flow, I'd love to get Flow type definitions for Glamorous. But that gives you really great auto-completion. But it's still not perfect. So another solution problem to be solved. And we'd love to see more. One cool thing about styled components is because it's actual CSS in a template literal, with Atom at least, they do have syntax highlighting, which actually I think is pretty legit. But not all editors have that. So if you're like into editors, I'm pretty sure WebStorm is Kotlin. So if you want to get into Kotlin, you can do a WebStorm plugin. And then performance. This is always a question. So let's, with the last minute or two that I have, I'm just going to explain why performance is such a concern for people. And this is a real problem. Yeah, this is a real problem. So when the browser is loading your application, if you're using CSS and JS, first it has to load the JavaScript, and then it's going to parse the JavaScript, and then it's going to run the JavaScript, and then it's going to generate, the JavaScript is going to generate your CSS. This is all at runtime. And then it's going to inject your CSS into the browser, into a style sheet. And then the browser needs to parse that as CSS. So you see that? Parse, parse. Not cool. And then it needs to apply the CSS to the page. So if you're not using CSS and JS, then you kind of get over the inject CSS. Like you still have to load it, right? So we'll replace load, inject with load, and then parse and then apply. So you're skipping a bunch of steps, which is kind of nice. So then we apply it, and then if we re-render, we need to generate, inject, parse, and apply. Most of the CSS and JS solutions have this piece pretty quick. Like they're able to generate the CSS, it's cached, and it's really fast. But it's still like it's not as fast as it could be. So there are a couple of ways that people are trying to solve this. One thing that I'm working on is a CSS and JS precompiler. It's a Babel plugin that will look for the objects in your code and precompile those into classes. And then what you get out is the transpiled JavaScript code and the generated CSS code. And then you send that just like normal, like regular CSS that you would send anything. And then on the client side, it'll rehydrate just like server-side rendering, but it's like build time. It's actually really, really cool and really fun. And if you want to get into it, please talk to me because we'll have a good time. It'll be fun. Glam is this thing. The guy who created Glamour, his name's Sunil Pai. He's awesome. He created a smaller version, Glam. Haha. Yeah. So Glam is really impressive, and yeah, definitely something else to take a look at. So styled components actually has it even worse than what I showed on the previous slide. It not only has to like parse your JavaScript and run it and everything, but it actually, before it injects it into the browser, here, let's go back. I'll just show where this is at. So when it's doing this generate step, it's actually parsing it as CSS in JavaScript. It uses JavaScript to parse the CSS during the generate step. And then it generates the CSS vendor prefixes and applies a bunch of stuff. So it actually has to send a parser to the browser which makes styled components quite big. But they are working on that with this plugin, Babel plugin styled components, which will it's kind of like a pre-compiler type thing. It's kind of limiting, which is one of the reasons why I still created Glamorous, even though I knew they were working on this. But it exists, and it could be improved, and you can help, and it's awesome. And then there's this tool called Polished that makes creating your CSS in JS really nice, and there's like a pre-compiler for that as well. How many people have heard of prepack? Okay, prepack is this really amazing thing. It's JavaScript implemented in JavaScript, and it runs your JavaScript and gives you back some JavaScript. And what it gives you back is presumably maybe more, maybe less actual JavaScript code, but it will certainly be less memory intensive and run faster. And so prepack, there's some potential there to basically make what I'm building right here totally not unnecessary, which would be awesome because I love not having to build things and focusing on other things I want to build instead. So yeah, get into prepack. That's cool stuff. And then there could be some other solutions that you all could come up with, and I am excited to see what you come up with. So I'm pretty much done. Just some resources here. This blog post at the end by Mark, by Mark was just published today, like literally 10 minutes ago, and it's really fantastic. So for those of you who are still unsure of whether or not you care about CSS and JS, I recommend you read that blog post because he probably did a better job of it than I did. He gave a better talk of it than I did, certainly at JSConf EU, and that will be published soon. So yeah, check those things out. And thank you so much.